it turned out that the nuclear power plant management had all left, so there was no one to give instructions or to defend it, she told CNN earlier. So that is another interesting development. Chernobyl is, you know, I wouldn't say how far it is from Kiev, not that far away, I don't think. It's about an hour's drive, maybe less than that from Kiev, the Ukrainian capital. And of course, because of the contamination there and the radioactive material that still exists in the surrounding area, which is why it's an exclusion zone, of course, any kind of disruption at all threatens to, bring all that dust back up again, brush all that dust back up again. We're literally talking about dust that is radioactive, and at the time, back in the late 1980s, caused thyroid cancer amongst many, many people in Kiev and in the surrounding area as well, as they breathed in those radioactive particles. The last thing anybody wants right now is for that nightmare to be revived with a military confrontation on the grounds in the area of that exclusion zone. So I think we all hope right now that that's something that won't happen, Jake.
All right, Matthew Jensen, your memory is right. It was April 1986, the Chernobyl disaster. Before we do our next step, I want to bring in the former Director of National Intelligence, retired General James Clapper. What is the potential significance if there is a firefight going on in the area of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster with all that still radioactive dust?
It's huge. It would have huge implications not only for Ukraine, obviously, but for the whole region, to include, ironically enough, Russia. And this is apart from the 15 other nuclear reactors still active at four different sites across Ukraine. None of them in the Donbass region, fortunately. So this, to me, is a real problem. And the Russians are not known for discriminate targeting. If they either wittingly or unwittingly hit one of these facilities, you have a real disaster on your hands.
It's sobering news, of course, on a very serious day already. Let's talk now with the former United States ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor. Ambassador Taylor, good to see you as always. I guess the first question is there anything that can be done to stop Putin and Russia from a complete and total takeover of Ukraine, short of NATO sending troops in, which they will not do?
Jake, the Russian military clearly has the capability to go into many of the cities, many of the largest cities. It probably doesn't have the capability to go in all. It doesn't have the manpower. The Russian military doesn't have the 3 million, 4 million troops that would be necessary to occupy all of Ukraine. Several people have noticed the size of Texas. This is not something that can be controlled or occupied all over. However, they can go into Kyiv, they can go into Kharkiv, they can go into Lviv, they can go into Odessa, they can go into certain places and take over, and the key will be Kyiv. The key will be the seat of government, and the important thing for the Ukrainians will be to maintain that government somewhere, whether it's in Kyiv, if they can defend, or if it's somewhere else. But other than that, Jake, there's not a lot that they can that the military can do. The military is going to make the Russians. It'd be painful for the Russians. It'll be more painful for the Ukrainians. But the Russians and Mr. Putin will have on his hands a lot of Russian soldiers dead going back to Russia to be buried. But away to some of these big cities.
So we've heard today from the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, as well as the foreign minister of Ukraine, pleading for the West, specifically for the European Union, to unplug Russia from what is called the SWIFT banking system. Explain what that is and why this is not just an easy decision for the European Union to stop Putin, to punish him.
Stopping Putin is going to be hard. Putin has indicated by his actions that he's not to be stopped by disincentives like economic sanctions. So it's not going to stop him clearly. It will, we'll talk about SWIFT, SWIFT or sanctions on other banking facilities, other big commercial banks. 3 or 4 or 5 largest commercial banks, Jake, if sanctioned, in full blocking sanctions so that they can't operate with U.S. dollars, that will have an effect on the economy right away, on the Russian economy right away. And it will make it impossible for Russians to use bank accounts and credit cards. SWIFT will have a similar effect, but just putting the sanctions on the top 3 or 4 or 5 commercial banks will have as big an effect as SWIFT. SWIFT is known, but this is another approach. We're going to hear from President Biden clearly about how to address this. One or the other of those 2 options, SWIFT or large commercial banks, are going to be blocked. That is clear.
An emergency meeting of the G7 powers this morning took place. What do you think the international response should look like right now? Should it include sanctioning those banks that you mentioned, perhaps booting Russia from the SWIFT system and more? What would actually cause Putin to, I mean, I don't think he's going to withdraw from Ukraine, but to reconsider what he's doing?
So just the fact that the G7 is united is very important, and that's got to be troubling to President Putin. He's been surprised, I imagine, at the unity of the NATO alliance, of the G7, of the alliance between the United States and Ukraine, about the resilience of President Zelensky. President Putin has undoubtedly been surprised by all that, not enough to keep him from this fateful step that he's taken right now, but that will have an effect. That unity of effort by the G7, by the other nations that are associated with the Western Alliance, that will have an effect, and it will push back on it. The other thing, Jake, is he has to know, President Putin has to know that he will, in the end, will lose. He remembers Afghanistan, where he went in strong and came out weak, very weak. The Soviet Union went in very strong, and the Soviet Union, in the end, dissolved in some degree because of Afghanistan. That they were run back out. You can go in strong, as he's doing now, but the Ukrainian people, Ukrainian resistance, Ukrainian territorial defense forces, Ukrainian people value their freedom, value their association with Europe, and they want to continue that. They don't want to be behind a new Iron Curtain. They want to be free. And Mr. Putin will have to face that, and he's facing the unity of the international community with the Ukrainians.
Ambassador Bill Taylor, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.